Hi, I'm Jeff Clapes from Wakefield's BB Library, the traveling librarian, with another short armchair travel presentation on Sarajevo, the once war-torn but now vibrant capital of Bosnia. The Balkans have always been one of my favorite parts of the world, and this fall I spent time exploring Belgrade and northern Serbia, as well as Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sarajevo is the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of several independent nations that emerged from the violent breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Bosnia arguably suffered more than any other region and finally took its current form after the Dayton Accords in 1995, when it was created as an independent nation. But it was divided into three parts: mostly Muslim or Bosniak Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which you can see on this map in blue, and the Republika Srpska, which is populated mostly by ethnic Serbs, shown here in pink. A third small zone, the Brčko district, lies on the border with Serbia. Sarajevo, the capital, lies in a narrow east-west valley completely surrounded by mountains. These mountains were, of course, a major reason for its selection as the site of the 1984 Winter Olympics. It's long been an important bridge between East and West, and Sarajevo still retains a mix of Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian culture, which you can see in the street patterns, architecture, and food. The central square is on the end of the bustling Ottoman market area known as the Başçarşıya, which is a maze of narrow pedestrian streets full of cafes, restaurants, and shops selling all kinds of crafts. You'll find metal and leather work, clothes and fabric, jewelry, and of course delicious food. One of the things you'll find yourself doing several times a day is enjoying Bosnian coffee, served in special cups, here with a sticky dessert of baked apples, honey, and nuts. Sarajevo is also, of course, famous for one of the most important events in the last century, when the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated on this bridge, known as the Latin Bridge, right in the center of the city. It's the oldest bridge in the city, but much more famous for that shooting, which occurred in the summer of 1914 and was the spark that touched off the First World War. 80 years later, after also suffering significantly in World War II, Sarajevo was again in the news as it underwent a 4-year siege in the 1990s that took the lives of almost 14,000 people, including thousands of civilians. The National Library and its archives were unfortunate victims as well, but the building, which you can see here, has been restored and now has pride of place in the city center along the river. It was originally built in the 1890s in a Moorish style as the City Hall, and in 1949 it was converted for use as the National Library. Its destruction in 1992 became a symbol of the senselessness of the war. The central mosque, the Gazi Husrev Beg Mosque, is one of the most important Islamic buildings in the Balkans. It was built in the early 1500s and, of course, significantly damaged in the war, but then restored in 2002. Adjacent to it is an old madrasa, or school, Islamic school, as well as a brand new library and Islamic cultural center. Down the street is another mosque, the Ferhadiye Mosque, which was also built in the 16th century and has a beautiful cemetery in front. Walking down Ferhadiye Street, which is the main pedestrian street, you can see a distinct change when you cross into the new part of town, which has much more Baroque, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and Austro-Hungarian architecture. In the central square there, you'll see the Catholic Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, which was actually not built until the late 19th century and modeled after a church in France. It has a modern memorial to Pope John Paul II in front. Further down the street is the National Theater. And here's the Eternal Flame, which is a memorial to victims of World War II, when Sarajevo was under the occupation of the Nazis and also the fascist government from Croatia. Here's a good example of an Art Deco cinema built in 1902. And across the street, another Art Deco gem, one of the major banks in the city. On the outskirts of the old town is this Ali Pasha Mosque, another good example of Ottoman architecture, which sits in a beautiful park and has a Muslim cemetery. Along the rather dry Miljacka River, which runs through the center of the city, you'll find a series of monumental buildings museums, banks, university buildings, and so forth. This is the Academy of Fine Arts. And here are some examples of university buildings, another of the national theaters, and banks. There are also many buildings that are in varying states of repair. Many of them have beautiful architectural details like these. Some have been restored, and others, like this one, are awaiting funding for restoration for a hopeful rebirth in the future. This Moorish-style synagogue was built in 1902 and is the only active one left in the city. There are also two very important Orthodox churches. This old one dates back to the 1500s and has a gorgeous interior. The new one, which was built in a Baroque style, was built in the center of the city and looks out onto one of the parks, and was built in the late 19th century. There are many places in Sarajevo where you can see a juxtaposition of old and new. Here are the foundations of some early Byzantine and Ottoman markets, which are an archaeological site now and are immediately adjacent to this brand new post-war hotel. Despite losing most of its trees in the war because citizens under the siege needed to chop them down to use as fuel, Sarajevo has returned to its past and is now again a very green city with many parks. This is one of the more popular riverfront parks that has a nice gazebo with concerts and cafes. And here's an unusual example of something unique to the city. It's called the Sarajevo Rose. It's the imprint of a mortar shell that exploded on the street in this location, damaging the pavement. After the war, the holes were filled with red resin as an artistic way of memorializing the many people who lost their lives during the siege. So you can find them around the city, and each one represents an exact location where citizens trying to escape sniper fire or mortar shells were killed during the war. Across the river is another beautiful mosque complex. And up on top of the hill is the Sarajevo Brewery, which is known not only for its beautiful design, but the fact that it never ceased production even during the war. Built over a natural spring, it was a major source of water for people during the siege, and now it's open for tours. You can walk up into many of the hilly neighborhoods surrounding the city for amazing views, often through one of the many Muslim cemeteries, a good example of which you can see here. Many of these tombs are, of course, from the early to mid-1990s, when the war was at its height. It's a good way to see some of the day-to-day life in the more ordinary residential neighborhoods around the center of the city. Here's a fortified gate that leads up to one of the two main bastions that protect Sarajevo from the hills up above. From there, the views over the city are stunning, and you can see the contrast between the war-damaged buildings that have never been rebuilt and gleaming skyscrapers in the new city off on the outskirts. If you turn around and look towards the east from the bastions, you can actually see right into the dramatic gorge that leads into the city from that direction and makes it feel very close to the surrounding lush mountain scenery. If you're up for a walk, about a half an hour from town is this excellent example of an Ottoman-style bridge, known as the Goat Bridge, where you'll find locals picnicking by the riverbed in the park area along the side of the road. So if you like a city that has beautiful architecture, abundant street life, lots of history and culture, and all set in a dramatic mountain setting, Sarajevo should definitely be on your travel list. If you'd like to learn more about the Balkans, I'll be doing 3 traveling librarian programs at BB Library this winter, one on Belgrade and northern Serbia, then one on Sarajevo and northeastern Bosnia, and finally one on Mostar and southern Bosnia and Herzegovina. So check out our website and calendar for publicity about dates for these programs, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.